Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Garcia, and I will be presenting on Chapter 3 of our textbook Children in Society from pages 65 to 76. And this part of the chapter is titled The History of Western Childhood. Before I get into that, I want to talk about the first part of the chapter, which is called Culture and Historical Constructions from pages 57 to 65, because I think it adds value and it also adds context to the portion of the reading that I will be talking about. So the main ideas that we find in the first half of the chapter are that childhood is not a universal experience. It is shaped by time, culture, and social norms. The meaning of childhood has evolved across history and societies. Social institutions like the family, school, and media play major roles in shaping childhood, and the emphasis on childhood as a social construct not biologically fixed but created by societal norms. And these are just main ideas that are really going to help us along this whole class to understand what childhood is, how it was developed, and how it keeps developing. So the main concepts we find in the portion of our reading, pages 65 to 76, are that the evolution of the concept of childhood in Western history, shifts in societal attitudes and roles assigned to children over time. This chapter explores how Western societies have historically conceptualized childhood, including shifts over time, referencing ideas such as Philip Berry's notion of centuries of childhood, where childhood was once seen as a brief and unimportant stage, but later came to be valued as a distinct and protected phase of life. And now here are the main ideas that we find in pages 65 to 76, the history of Western childhood. And these are the overview of our how childhood has been understood in different Western historical periods, medieval period, right? Children were seen as small adults. The Renaissance and Enlightenment had emerging views of children as innocent and in need of protection and education. The Industrial Era, we saw the rise of child labor and later reforms to protect children. In the modern era, the institutionalization of education and more psychological focus on childhood development. And we also see shifts that reflect broader changes in economic systems, religion, and family structure. And so I want to tie in this chapter to the previous chapters, chapter one and chapter two. In chapter one, we are introduced to the concept of childhood as a social construct, which chapter three develops some depth through historical and cross-cultural examples, while chapter one lays the theoretical groundwork as functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism. Chapter 3 applies these ideas to real world culture and historical differences. In Chapter 2, it is discussed how institutions as family, education, media, these shape children's experiences based on social class, race, and gender. Chapter 3 continues this by examining how broader cultural values and historical forces affect how these institutions treat children, more specifically the 19th century versus modern Western parenting norms. All right, one of my examples that I have for how children are developed in the Western uh, or in the Western society is a Mayan mother. This is a more modern pic, but or more modern picture, sorry. But we can see a Mayan mother and she carries her baby on her side, right? She's not picking her up like we're used to in our society. She has her, I guess I want to say like an overall in the back, and she carries her on her hip and allows the baby to feed whenever she wants. If we read in the chapter, uh, the author tells us that a lot of native societies are very intimate with their children. They're very hands-on with their children. They're very involved with the children. Matter of fact, the Kung are involved with children up until the age of 3 or 4, where then let them, where they then finally put them down so they can walk. And I think that was very interesting. I think it was nice to see that, like I said before, childhood is ever changing. It depends on the society you're in, and the time you're in, and the culture you're in. And so the development for Native children is completely different than the development for the children in America or the children in urbanized societies. And we have child labor, more specifically from 1760 to 1840, because child labor has always existed and it continues to exist, sadly. But the book talks about child labor during the Industrial Revolution and how they were put to work in factories for 8 to 10 hours and they just didn't have any rights. And so, from this era specifically, we see kids being abused. We see some reforms going on for them that actually establish that, hey, these are kids, these are not adults, they shouldn't be here, and we should treat them differently. And finally, I want to talk about childhood recognition, specifically in America from 1870 to the 1930s. And this is when kids like we really started to see kids as different. You know, we didn't stop seeing them as small adults who needed to contribute to the family economy and more so as independent beings that needed nourishing and teaching and guidance. And so from this era specifically in America, we shifted our view from having kids be workers, small workers, and more so as our future, specifically in the working class. The working class really took a shift here and they said, okay, maybe we don't need all our children to fully be workers or to fully be involved in the economic status of our family. So let's send them out and have them receive education so in the future they can provide more for us. And so maybe it wasn't always on the basis of, yeah, let the kids receive education. It was more so on the basis of let us have a better future. But it was during this era that we do see a shift in childhood and where we do see a shift in mentality that, okay, specifically here in America, that children should be treated differently and should be brought up differently and should be taught differently. And that's it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and I hope you learned something from the things I said.